the clock on the wall says it's 2 minutes gone past the hour of 9 o'clock in the studios of Classic and across the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. Good morning to you, wherever you are, those of you here at home, across the region, and in other parts of the diaspora. It is Monday. It is the 21st day of the month of February, and I want to welcome you to another episode of To The Point. And certainly, we appreciate you having chosen Classic for your listening entertainment in the daytime. We want to say good morning also to our viewers that's joining us now on television, those on Channel 7, Channel 11, and Channel 20, or those of you that's joining us via the World Wide Web at www.gbn.gd, YouTube, or WhatsApp. We say thanks for being part of this morning's broadcast. My guest this morning is Supervisor of Elections, Mr. Elvis Moraine, and the Voters and Civic Education Officer, Mr. Ferdinand Phillip, from the Electoral Office. We want to say good morning to you, to both of you gentlemen, and welcome to the program.
Good morning to you, Mr. Cadore, and we are happy to be part of the program, and good morning to you listening and viewing public.
Indeed, it's a pleasure having you here, and I say thank you for accepting the invitation. Before we delve into the specifics of it, just so certain that we can appreciate the purpose of this morning's conversation, I would ask each of you individual gentlemen to tell me in as succinct as possible your role. What is the role of the Supervisor of Elections and the role of the Civics and Educations Officer? Starting with you, Mr. Moraine.
Well, the Supervisor of Election actually has a huge responsibility in terms of managing the electoral process, that is, to have persons be part of a parliamentary democracy, or we say to get into the House of Representatives. In short, that is what it is.
Okay. And Mr. Phillip?
Yes, good morning to all persons, whether viewing or listening. My role basically is in the field of education, voter and civic education officer. So it's my responsibility to forward or advance the ideals of the office and all that pertains to the electoral matters to the general public in as efficient a manner as possible.
Okay. As you indicated, Mr. Moraine, your role is quite extensive. So I'm going to allow you to encapsulate, just give us a breakdown, and then we're going to get into some of the specifics as the conversation continues. In terms of highlight to us some of the daily functions that's carried out by your office.
Okay, as we speak, we're responsible for the electoral process, and that process in itself involves in a daily operation the registration of eligible electors that's the main thing. Now this is facilitated through what we call now the continuous registration process. So once you get to that stage, you're mature in terms of you reach the age of 18, you can make an application to be registered. Also, we look at replacement of cards, and now we are treating with the expired cards. But before that, for example, somebody who has a lost card or a defaced card or something happened in card damage, we were able to also facilitate that process. And we do the quarterly publication of the voters registration list. We have 2 addendums that will be done next end of March and also the end of September, and we have 2 consolidated lists will be done at the end of July and of course December.
I know very often, Mr. Moraine, people seem to think that the only time the office is engaged in any serious work is when elections is called. But I'm getting the sense that is the furthest thing from the truth, isn't it?
I didn't get your last point.
I'm saying very often people seem to think that your office doesn't seem to be. Most times you spend your time idly doing nothing, except for when an election, when your election is called. But I'm getting the sense that is the furthest thing from the truth.
the process is very, very involved, very involved. I mean, you have to consistently make sure that your list, or you're in a state of readiness for elections. Because the truth be told is that in our system, that the election can be called at any time, right? So you have to make sure you are ready. Your first line of that readiness is to make sure that your voters list is intact, right? And we also have to keep ourselves abreast with things like the polling divisions and so on, because if an election is called, you want to be able to be ready at that time. We also have to procure goods and services, in the sense that, okay, we are replacing cards, you need materials, so it is constantly making sure that you are ready. And of course, Mr. Phillip could speak to what he does, but he has to also constantly remind the public as to what are, the requirements to address the concerns and so on, on a daily basis.
You said one of your main function would be to ensure that eligible Grenadians, they are registered, and that's a continuous process, Mr. Phillip. Take us through the process, but first tell me, let's qualify for the purpose of this conversation the eligibility criteria. Who qualifies to be registered or to make that voters list?
Yes, as it regards that, and in the development of the question that you posed to Mr. Moraine, definitely we are not idle during the off period when an election is not in the air. One of the things that the new system, the legislation that came in as of January 2012, emphasizes its continuous registration. You don't have to wait until a certain period of time in the year to get registered. Eligibility, once a person attains the age of 18, they in part become qualified to be registered. 18 years until death or older. They must be resident in a particular constituency. This is also being emphasized. So 18 years or older, resident in a particular constituency, because of course you can only be registered in one constituency at any given time. That person must be Grenadian. Not a Grenadian, that person must be Commonwealth. Again, we emphasize that persons are members of the Commonwealth who have resided in Grenada for at least 12 months prior to them to get registered. On that residency, you are resident, you are Grenadian, you are 18 years older, or if not a Grenadian, you are a member of the Commonwealth. Again, all of these qualify you to be registered. Again, also, you are not and I must emphasize here, certified by a recognized practitioner. If you are not a certified lunatic, so you could be 18, you could be resident, and all these things. But if you are certified as out of your mind, so to speak, a lunatic, you will not be registered. Also, there are certain provisions, legal provisions, that prevent a person from being registered. For example, I think it's not before me, so let me not delve deeply into it. But if you have been convicted of a particular crime for which you have not served the penalty, and as I said, there are specifics that I don't want to go into here. All of these can debar you, but other than that, these are the qualifying criteria for an individual to get registered.
So am I to understand that once you're a Grenadian, let's assume, because I'm registered, I'm 18, I'm registered, in good state of mind, but I reside in the U.S. An election is called tomorrow. Does that qualify me to vote? Although I live outside of Grenada and I'm registered.
How do we answer that? We are guided. We have heard that question come up on several occasions. It has been a contentious issue. We have heard the arguments for and against that. But the reality is that we are, as I said, we are guided by legislation, and there is no legislation that says an individual who is registered, who is qualified, eligible, registered, they are on that voters list, and living in a foreign country. There's no legislation that says they cannot come in, land in Grenada the day of elections, and straight from the airport go to the polling division where they are registered, polling station. No legislation that's person may have their sentiment one way or the other in regards to that. But again, let me emphasize, there is no legislation that says a person so deemed cannot vote.
So I guess ultimately, once they satisfy the necessary criteria, as they say, it is all fair.
Definitely.
Once they satisfy the criteria. We're keeping our eyes on the clock. It is 13 minutes gone past the hour in the morning time. For those of you just joining us, my guest this morning is the Supervisor of Elections, Mr. Elvis Moraine, and the Civic Education Officer, Mr. Ferdinand Phillip. And today we're looking at the electoral processes, exactly what it actually entails. We talk about, we made reference to the electoral list, but he also, Mr. Ferdinand, Mr. Moraine, Phillip made reference to constituencies and polling divisions. What exactly are you referring to when you make reference, when the electoral office, your office makes reference to those terms? Mr. Moraine.
Okay, so in the case of constituency, right, there are clear limitations that you have, and we know that we have 15 constituencies, including Carriacou and Petitmatnick. And within each constituency, we have polling divisions, right? So in other words, there are further demarcation that divides a constituency into different polling divisions. So what happens is that in each polling division, there would be a polling station set up when it comes to elections. So you know exactly which polling division you're going to cast your ballot. So in other words, within that constituency, there are some divisions where, you can, based on location of persons, villages, and what have you then are to that division within the constituency.
And once I'm registered, is it possible that I can be registered? And am I allowed to vote at a specific polling division? Or can I decide, you know what? I'm at Springs, there's 5, I'm just going to show up at 1 on election day, and that is okay because I am registered?
No, it's specific, right? Everybody has been assigned at the time of your registration, a polling division, and you're expected to vote there. You heard of a person say that they have gone to a polling division, in elections, and they have not found the list, right? The name on the list. And that is why we encourage persons also to check when the list is published, right? Based on the division, you check to make sure you're there, because you can find it's a very difficult task to locate which polling division you need to vote, because you will not be allowed to vote if you're not belonging to that polling division.
The electoral list, Mr. Phillip, and I assume it's an extensive list as it is. Let's look at the lists as we get the readiness of that list. How is that list compiled? And let's talk about some of the checks and the balances that are put in place to honor the integrity of the list itself. Mr. Phillip.
Yes. Let me start from the beginning, so to speak. Someone doesn't get on the list until they initiate the process. So let me get it clear. Sometimes people have the perception that we remove persons on the list or that we place persons into certain places. It doesn't happen like that. The process must be completed by the individual who has to get registered. And it cannot be a word of mouth initiation. The system recognizes the documents. So, principally, either your valid passport or your official, not the baptismal, but the official birth certificate. This is what the system recognizes. For persons who are married, and for example, as a woman, and she would want to carry her husband's surname, the system again recognizes the marriage certificate. And there are certain other documents on a case-by-case basis that may be required. For example, if somebody has done a change of name, maybe a deed poll and such. So again, this in getting onto that list, it starts with the individual who desires to be registered initiating the process. As you are aware, we have been involved or engaged from us February 3rd, 2020, in a replacement process because all of the voters' IDs were expired. Again, if a person engages the office to have their expired voters' ID replaced, again, documentation is absolutely critical. So as I said, it starts at the beginning and it starts with the potential voter initiating the process with their documentation. The office cannot take it upon itself to put anyone on a list without that person following due process. Now, upon receiving that application, it is done by the AROs. These are persons that work from 9 until 5 at the various offices. I believe we have 19 offices throughout the 15 constituencies. They receive the application. They ensure they are the first line of defense, so to speak, for that list. They ensure that the required information is presented. Now, subsequent to that, the registration officer, because I just indicated the ARO, the Assistant Registration Officer. The registration officer now, principal person in charge of that constituency, goes through that document, those documents that are supplied by the applicant. And this is where the meat of verification takes place, because there is a verification or a vetting process to ensure that persons who do not need to be on that list are not added on there. So they do the verification process, and it may involve inquiring who is that person. If they know the person, is well, fine. If they don't know that person, it may involve a phone call, as light as that. It may involve a deeper investigation, maybe a site visitation, maybe a requirement of a further piece of documentation. All of these things are involved in verification. After that, the information is then received by the headquarters, the main office, where the Assistant Supervisor of Elections, principally, working along with the supervisor, goes through those documents, that application, to ensure that all of the information is as expected. So you notice that there are layers of vetting that happens to any one application that comes in before it is finally printed by the technical person, the system administrator. And once it is printed, of course, the information is inputted into our system. That person is on the list. At the end of printing that card, we still have what you call a quality assurance process, where the card itself is looked at to ensure that it is on par. And once that is done, of course, then the registration officer collects the card, brings it back to the office, and the individual who has done the application can then come. It's only the individual, I must emphasize here, they will come and collect their card. So now this is all of that is involved in a person becoming registered and being added to the list. However, the process doesn't end there, because this is where the general public comes in, and we keep on emphasizing to the public that they need to continuously scrutinize that list. And of course, by legislation, the list is posted at the various places, the post office, the revenue offices, police stations, courthouse, medical stations. And where these are not available in a polling division, permission is sought from business places and the list is posted there. Now, this is legislated. This is what I'm saying here now. Also, as of a few years ago, the information was made available online. So persons in the privacy of their home, you wouldn't find that in our legislation, but because of technological advancement, we thought it would have been a disservice to the general public not to make that facility available to them. And so persons, peogrenada.org, can log on to our website and they can search that voters list for any person who is registered, all 80-something thousand persons, checking the validity of their registration. So I hope in a nutshell that gives you a basic idea of all that entails before someone ends up on the list. And even though they end up on the list, it doesn't mean a guarantee that they would remain there. Because if you notice somebody's there and they really don't, they are not living what they are saying, you can challenge that in what we call an objection. So the process is not a slam dunk and that's it.
Okay, and I guess we're gonna get into that element of it in just a while. That's what you call and there's also a claims and objections process. We're gonna get into that into a while. Mr. Moraine, when we started the conversation, you actually hinted, I'm not sure if it's Mr. Moraine, but you did intimate the gentleman that your system has been changed. You made a switch over from systems. What was the main reason driving that change? And what are some of the advancements that the new system offers as compared to the old one? Mr. Moraine?
Well, we moved into, there was a proposal for an electronic system. Now, that had to be supported by legislation. So you had to make the amendments for that to happen. Now, Mr. Phillip mentioned some of the things that we can do now. That way you can search online. We have the readily we can. For instance, if we're going back to the fact where Mr. Phillip take you to the processing of our application for registration. Now, what you have is that yes, the ARO, which is our assistant registration officer, that person has certain access within the system, right? Then you come to the verification process where that's done by the registration officer. They also have access. Now, the supervisor as well as the assistant will have access. So we need a system. However, while we have access, we cannot subsume the role that is ascribed to somebody else. So, for instance, I cannot go in and register someone. It's just that is not within my remit to do so because we have certain levels of access. So that in itself gives us that to check at, and I said earlier, as Mr. Phillip said, you can sit at your home and now check the list, right? It's something that you couldn't have done before, but it had to be supported in legislation.
And I guess that's what would answer the issue of maintaining those checks and balances, help to ensure and maintain the integrity of the list in terms of what you do, and give the public the confidence that listen, this is a legitimate process with no corners to it.
Of course. All right, and we are very comfortable with the system, that we can do that. And Mr. Phillip emphasized the power of the entire population in ensuring that the list is as sterile as possible, in ensuring that we even have a greater level of integrity, in the process. Because, I just want to emphasize this point. People sometimes say, okay, you put people on the list and then, somebody has to come to question it. Now, there's no way, Mr. Kyle, that this office can really sit down and validate that Mr. Cadore is living expects. Because it means I would have to sit out in your village or by your house, right, for an extensive period of time to ensure to say, well, look, for certainty that you are not residing there. And that is why the power of the entire population in ensuring that this is done. And remember, the claims objection is a very involved process. Right? So we are asking persons now to do that, to get involved in the process. Don't wait. We have seen persons wait until an election. Let us start doing it now. So we make sure, because I often say to people, what is the purpose of us trying to bring something just before an eve of election? And because of the involved nature of the process, you can't even get through the entire process. When we can do that every time a list is published. As a matter of fact, the claims of objection can come in at any time. We effect it, of course, within that period. So it's something that we encourage the public because we do believe that they have a significant role to play. I just wanted to put in this, Mr. Carter, here. I must say, however, that during recent time, we have seen a greater interest in the population. We receive a lot of calls, for persons having access to get access to the list, and they're asking the question, which is excellent, right? We welcome that and we encourage it. What we didn't see, right, up to Friday, that we didn't have any written claims or objection, right? And we're not saying you just do it for do its sake, but we are saying that we want to see that coming, because we want to make sure that we are maintaining the integrity of the system. So it's something we encourage and we want to applaud, thus far, that level of involvement.
28 minutes gone past the hour of 9 o'clock in the morning time. This is To The Point. My guests this morning, Elvis Moraine and Ferdinand Phillip from the Electoral Office. We'll take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll open up the telephone lines and we continue to entertain your call right here on To The Point for today, the 21st day of February.
For a season of grooving smooth and live on GBN. Grooving Smooth and Live is a 1-hour performance gig every Thursday from 8 p.m. featuring performances from our local musicians and short interviews discussing all things musical. Every Thursday, a different musician and a different instrument will be featured, from the violin to the saxophone to the trumpet, guitar, and steel pan. Our local musicians playing, improvising, and educating us on all genres of music. Join GBN with host musicians Matthias and Shireen and a special guest every Thursday at 8 p.m. It's Grooving Smooth and Live on GBN.
Welcome back to the program. 29 minutes gone past the hour in the morning time. My guest this morning is Mr. Elvis Moraine, the Supervisor of Elections, and Mr. Ferdinand, who is the Civics and Educations Officer. Before the break, gentlemen, we spoke. We were speaking about the voters' registration list, and we did intimate Mr. Ferdinand and Mr. Phillip that there is a claims and objection process. Explain the purpose of what exactly are those processes. And again, reminding you, the number on the inside is 435-2041. And I've noticed that there is some questions coming via the social media platforms. I would also be taking questions off of those platforms, and you can also submit your questions via WhatsApp, which is the same number as the studio, 435-2041. Mr. Ferdinand, the claims objections process.
Yes, in a nutshell, a claim is a request for inclusion of some information that probably was omitted, okay? A claim is made by the registered person. For example, maybe their place of their polling division may have been wrongly inputted, maybe a name misspelled, things like that. Maybe occupation was not properly stated. It's made by the individual himself or herself. That one relatively straightforward. What is contentious and what I think generates a lot of interest is the objections. Now, an objection is made by an individual who is registered in the constituency against another person who's registered in that constituency. So let me say here, somebody that is registered in one constituency cannot object to someone in another constituency. But an individual in the said constituency can raise an objection to someone who is registered there. Now, when our lists are posted, the various lists, we usually give, according to the legislation, a 7-day period for claims and objections. The persons have 7 days to actually do that. I believe just in January, this was posted on the 24th, and persons had until the 31st, so that 7-day period, to make their claims and objections. As Mr. Moraine indicated, we did not receive any. Now, in making the objections, there are what we call forms, or these are legislative forms. These are objection forms, just as they are claim forms. So persons, if you are raising an objection against a person, it must be made in writing and delivered, by hand delivered, or sent by post to the registration officer in the constituency where the objection is being raised. Now, having received those objections, the registration officer, and I'm just giving you the skeleton of it, the registration officer must then communicate by registered post to the person who is objected to, and of course to the person who did the objection. The registration officer must also keep records. All of these things must be done with records being kept. They must communicate to the supervisor of elections in writing again all of the objections that have been raised. They must keep a list of the objected persons at the office. They must post in the constituency again, in that polling division, the names of all of the persons that are objected. I believe it needs to stay up there for at least 30 days. They must set a date, because that person now is operating like they have the power to hear that objection of a magistrate. Again, let me emphasize, that person has the power of a magistrate in particular just to hear those objections. So they can call witnesses, they can request documentation and so forth. So they set a date where the person who is objected to must come basically and defend themselves. If the registration officer is not satisfied with the information that they have received regarding the objection, they may request further information. At the end of that process, that registration officer makes a decision. They would either uphold that objection or they may deny it. If they uphold the objection and so the individual who is objected to will then be removed from the list, that individual can appeal higher to the supervisor of elections. So they have bypassed the registration officer now. They have gone to the supervisor of elections with their appeal. They are challenging the decision of the registration officer. If the supervisor upholds the decision of the registration officer, then that objected individual can take their matter to the court of the land, okay? And so they can challenge the decision of the office. Again, in such a case, all of the documentation which by law we are required to keep must be presented to the magistrate who will make a final determination. But as I said, I just gave you in a nutshell the process, okay? If that objection is upheld, that individual will be removed from that particular constituency, from that polling division, and of course, they will then be asked to go and register in the correct place. Okay, so that in a nutshell is the process of objection.
Okay, there's a caller on the line. Good morning, caller. You alive?
Hello, good morning. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Go ahead. Your question, please.
I want to ask Mr. Phillip, please, sir. After 10 years, you have a card, a voter's ID card, right? And you have to get it renewed. Why you cannot use the same ID card to get it renewed? You have to go and get passport and you have to get all other things, which this happened to me. I have my ID card, I brought it to get the thing, and they telling me that I have to go and get about paper or some kind of document to get it reprint. It's not the same information that is on the computer and the same information on the card, sir.
Okay, so let me allow for a response. Thank you. Gentlemen?
Let me respond to that question. And I hope this explanation would put this to rest, because a lot of persons have been querying about this. No, I actually intimated earlier that for the process, for us to effect the electronic process, we had to make some amendments to the legislation, right? So let us look at how the process is done. No, your card is expired. And I think some people don't understand this. It's an electronic system. And for persons who are involved in doing things electronically, there are fields that you need to complete, right, in the process. Now, if you, for some reason, didn't complete the field, you cannot move forward in the process, right? And people need to understand this, right? Now, also, I want to add to this. The system is such that when you replace any application that is made, whether your card is replaced, whatever, or you have a change of name, change of resident, you enter a new field, right? It's a new application in the system. Now, if you do not revoke, right, the previous one, it means therefore that you will see the list come up with a double entry. So the Joseph Cadore would appear twice on the list, which cannot be, right? So the previous application must be revoked. So in other words, the information, right, is you have to do it all over, because of course it is. And when you reflect in the system, you must see the information flowing. So I hope people understand this, right? So you're not asking people and making things difficult. The fact is the system, that's what the system allows for. And that is how the process is done. right? So I hope that will give the caller the necessary clarity.
Yeah, there's another call on the line. Good morning, caller.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Cadore. Greetings. Listen, can you just hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Very well, thank you very much. Listen, here, the first question is this. Over the past three electoral cycles, there have been recommendations made by the OAS representation team here and even CARICOM. Can you tell us what efforts have been made to implement some of these recommendations? 2, can you tell me what has been done within these 10 years, so to speak, to guarantee that people with visual impairment in this here country, huge number we are, 9,000 plus, varying intensities, etc. And according to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, we have a right to a quote-unquote secret ballot. Efforts have been made in the past, nothing has been done. Ideas and recommendations have been given. Today nothing has been done. Well, that I've heard about. I'm asking you therefore, sirs, to tell us what's there in place to guarantee at my next right to exercise my franchise as a voter in this here country, that I can walk into the booth alone and do my do. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Will you?
Thank you very much, caller. Gentlemen, 2 questions posed at you.
Mr. Phillip, you want to go with anyone?
Can the question be repeated to me? It was distorted a bit. I didn't hear it.
So the first question has to do with the recommendations that was made in the last election process, recommendations from the OAS/CARICOM, and the question regarding the rights of persons that with visual impairment and the rights to cast their ballot secretly. What allocations have been made for such?
The second question, there is provision, and I do understand the concern of the caller in terms of the desire to be able to cast the ballot in secrecy, so to speak. However, as an office, we are guided by the legislation that is before us, and we do make provisions for persons who are visually impaired, among other issues. Now, we cannot go beyond that. And we are not saying, I know discussions have been engaged in this regard, but at the moment, we can only go by what our legislation allows. And so, yes, I understand what the caller is saying, but we cannot step beyond our remit in this case. I do believe that sometime in the future, the legislation may be amended to facilitate even what he's suggesting. But at the moment, as I said, we are guided. All that we do not do things in a vacuum. We are guided by the legislation. In relation to the second question, I believe it was the first question that he posed, in terms of the recommendations. Recommendations, especially from these foreign bodies, are like a revolving door. If you look at the legislation, the recommendations that they make in one country vis-a-vis another, there is a trend, a similar pattern that goes through. However, in relation to what he has asked, we have looked at the recommendations, we have been looking at them, and this is one of the things that is done in the off period, because of course an election is an electoral cycle. We have looked at in terms of the recommendations, and there are some things that probably could have just been addressed administratively. There are some things, again, in looking at them, they may require what we call an amendment. I am happy to announce to the caller and to others, we have constantly been hearing that cry for the issue of verification. And we are saying to the general public today that come the next general elections, one of the things that will be emphasized is a greater level of scrutiny in terms of the persons who apply to get onto that list. So let me just be clear as I say that, especially for persons who are doing transfers. And I think St. George South, especially, and since St. George is here, the Granans area, tends to receive a lot of persons in experiencing that migration from the rural areas to the urban areas. And so I guess because of work purposes and so forth, you tend to have that migration. a lot of those persons, as I said, are new persons to those constituencies. But once they are living in the constituency, they are entitled to get registered. So what we are doing, what we have been doing, and persons will know that, some persons have noted that, is that once you have transferred from one constituency to another, and that is across the board, and I emphasize here, this is particularly for the transfers, a deeper level of verification will be required. Because of course, it's not likely that the registration officer or the assistant registration officer will know you. Okay, there is a possibility, but it's not likely that will be the case. So to keep away from even the possibility of persons attempting to pad votes, we want to ensure that those persons who are doing the transfers are legitimate. So here, and permit me to just delve into one aspect of our presentation this morning. Quoting from our amendments of Act number 13 of 2018, and it says, in terms of verification, these are the requirements that a registration officer may require. So permit me to read here. The following documents may be used by a person to establish proof of ordinary residence. And if I can break down ordinary residence, it in a nutshell says it's the place where a person sleeps. And so yes, what is the required documents? A recent utility bill as proof that they are living in that place. B, a copy of a current lease agreement. Or C, a copy of a current receipt. D, a copy of property tax demand notice. Or E, any other document that the supervisor of elections may deem acceptable. Notwithstanding subsection 1, where a person is residing with his or her parent or guardian, the requirement under subsection 1 shall be satisfied if that person provides the registration officer with a signed declaration of his or her parents or guardian in the prescribed form. Now, there is a legislative form for that. So and let me just break it down quickly. If a young person, 18 years, 19 years, 20 years, living with their parents, have moved with that person to a new constituency, it's not likely they may have a Nawasa bill or a Brenneck bill or such in their name as proof of their residence, their change of residence. Mm-hmm. Their parents will. So what will be required in this case is a declaration from the parent or guardian indicating that that person is legally living in that place, along with a copy of the document from that parent or guardian. Now, a unique case came to us recently where a guy who was living in one constituency transferred to another constituency in a living type relationship, a common law relationship with his girlfriend. Now, the girlfriend is living in that constituency for several years. She has all utilities and everything on her name. He has nothing. He has only transferred there a few months ago. What is required in this case? Now, that's why I quoted the E part of that section. Any other document that supervisor of elections may deem acceptable. In such a case, he is required to present a declaration signed by a JP from the girlfriend, along with the documentation, piece of evidence, whether now a bill or whatever, that he indeed is living with her. And that will suffice the supervisor of elections in that case. Okay. So this we are saying here as in part of in terms of the recommendation has been enforced now, and this is especially for persons who are doing transfers, but it can also include somebody living in the constituency who the registration officer may not be too sure about. And this is all designed to add teeth to the whole process, and it lends itself to the question you asked: what is done to ensure that that list that we produce quarterly is as sterile or sanitized as possible?
Mr. Cadore,
yes, sir.
Let me just add a little bit to what the caller asked earlier. I know Mr. Phillip said that, but I just want to make a few important points, because I think what we have done, we asked about the recommendation, right? We've had some discussion internally. We have had discussion with the legal department. We were, as a ministry, as an office, we were hoping to engage political parties and so on at the end of January. That was delayed a bit. But I'll tell you what likely to happen. We most likely based on where we are with the pandemic, we are likely to have elections because it's constitutionally due within about just a year within the pandemic. So what we also did, we started conversation with the Ministry of Health as to having elections in a pandemic. And now we are going to meet our respective stakeholders on the recommendations, with the legal affairs and health, right? So hopefully we should get that out. I don't want to give a time, but at least within the first week of March, we should be out with that kind of discussion. So we will know whether we need to make amendments, but we know there are some things that are administrative. And I'll point out this one. For example, the recommendation speak of persons not presenting the card when they're voting. And that is an administrative thing because it is in the Act. So I could let people know that in the next election, persons are likely to present the card when they go to vote, right? So that is one we already addressed, and it is administrative because it's there. So there are other things that we need to look at. I want to make also a point when the caller specifically talk about aiding persons like him, right, to vote. Now, let me say this. Mr. Cadore and the nation, we cannot have a legislation that speaks to different levels of application. So, for example, the caller might be able to navigate himself or herself into the polling booth and do that, right, on his own. Can vote secretly, as I said, right? However, what's of the persons who can't do that, right? In other words, doesn't have that. So the issue of somebody who has a sight problem being able to do that is a bigger problem than just the electoral process, but it's one of education. Because it means, therefore, that we must make sure that every person is able to do that, right? So as it is now, we are not satisfied that everybody can do it. So you know what? We know what they do. They take the oath with somebody's going to assist. And I think that is where we are at this time.
But can we, I would assume looking forward as we evolve as a society, you could certainly understand the concerns that would make as we evolve. Is that something that we can look forward to anytime soon, with being embraced by our electoral process? Where persons
what I'm saying, Mr. Cadore, is not a difficulty to embrace. I am talking about the applicability of it, right? As to whether or not, because you cannot have a double system. In double legislation, you can have some persons required to take an oath to get somebody, and some persons can go in and do it alone, right? So, of course, it is progressive. It's what we need to look at. But as I said, there's a bigger issue, which is one of education, and not necessarily that is tied to the electoral process, but in the wider system of persons being able to. And for now, we're talking about sighted persons, but of course, we have to look. There might be other persons, other category of persons that can be accommodated in a similar way.
Thank you very much. We have a caller. Good morning, caller. You're live.
Your humble indulgence for one brief question, sir.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Listen, I'd like to ask the following. I got tripped off there. There's something I want to mention prior. Listen, sir, Mr. Gentleman and son, you people are just ignorant of modern technology and even rudimentary measures that anyone can implement. Rudimentary, I mean with a file folder to guarantee that each person with visual impairment, regardless of the intensity, can go into a polling booth and vote for themselves. You people have to read. Don't blame us for your inconsiderate nature and your incompetence over the years. And the final question is this. Well, you make me forget the final question because you rouse me up. But I'll come back next time. I'm not finished with you. Have a nice day, will you?
Thank you very much, sir. A question to you, gentlemen, 10 minutes onto the hour. You, as part of the process, you always have to try to maintain the integrity of the electoral list. What happens if someone is deceased? They're registered, they're deceased. You did intimate that they get onto the list when they initiate the process. How does one get removed from the list?
That is done. We have an arrangement with Deaths and Births and Death, who furnish us with all information of persons who have died. And of course, then we effect the process that way. I mean, I would tell you though that there are sometimes it is not readily available as we would like. So you would have delays there, but that is how it is done as we speak.
It is being done as you speak. 435-2041, that's the number on the inside. We go to the telephone lines. Classic, good morning, you're a live caller.
Yes, to the point, yeah?
Yes, you're live.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen, and good morning to the listening public. Sorry, I tuned in like 9:30, yeah? So if I miss certain information, I'm going to ask. Sorry about that. But what I want to know, there's a consolidated lease and an addendum lease. I would like to know when those leases are released. So, for instance, this election is March of this year. Would there be people that register late? Name would be on that list. So I would like to know when that list has been printed. Also, I would like the gentleman, to tell us where the registration office are located around the island. Or if they could do that on other programs, in advertisement, let people know where could they go to get registered in the different constituencies across the country. And last thing I want to mention about the lease, is there still lease available to the public domain whereby they used to put it in shops and other shops around the island? Is that still going on? That's it, sir.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think you may have spoken to some elements of it, but you can just respond.
Mr. Phillip, just go with that.
Okay, I in terms of the lists are posted at various public places. As I indicated, courthouses, revenue offices, post offices, medical stations, these public places where, and not just any public place, but especially where there is heavy human traffic. In every polling division, at least three lists are posted. So just to inform the caller, in every polling division, at least 3 lists are posted. It's not just in every constituency. So, for example, Carriacou, I believe, has, I think, up to A011, I believe, or A11. There 11 trees, there are at least 33 plus lists posted for for Carriacou. And consistently, they are placed at these various places that we have indicated. And again, it is legislated. This is by law. We don't just figure we're going to put it there. By law, they are placed there. And so the caller can rest assured. Also, in the constituency office itself, there is a copy of the list for persons to inspect. Now, in terms of the offices, I guess he's expressing that he needs to be able to find a particular office. In every constituency, there is an office. And for example, in St. George South, there are 2 offices, one at by the lines that Plainfield as you enter that road. There's one there, and there's one at Cafe Junction also, that's the St. George South. There are also 2 for St. George Northeast. There are 2 for St. George Southeast. And of recent time, for St. David, there are 2 offices because St. David is a linear constituency. It's rather long. And it was deemed, and we did hear the concerns of the general public, that they had to travel from one extreme of the constituency to another to get registered. So as we started the replacement process, a second office was placed at Permuta downstairs to communal building. As he expressed the concern, we will look at ways of making it definitely more user-friendly in terms of him being able to locate a particular office that he may want to get to at one time. Let me apologize because I believe it was 3 questions that he threw at us. I missed it all.
We slowly running out of time. I'm trying to engage this final caller on the line.
Your call again.
I think we have lost that caller. Gentlemen, certainly we're almost out of time, but no doubt I'm extending an invitation to you, and I think we did agree that initially, Mr. Phillip, that this will be the start of a process of educating the general public on your role and function. But for the purpose of time, I'm going to give each of you gentlemen a minute just to encapsulate our conversation, our discussion this morning before we wrap. Mr. Phillip, starting with you.
Yes, I just want to say something that I think is of critical importance to the general public. We are in the process of replacing the expired voters ID. Now, those replaced IDs will now carry a 10-year lifespan from the day of registration. So whereas it started in 2012 and all of them expired at the 31st January 2020, the new card that is being replaced for that voter will expire 10 years after the day that his application is received, his card is printed. And so there will be a staggered replacement process. And in that, 6 months, again, according to legislation, 6 months before the card expires, that person can go and replace their card, whether 2030 and going forward. Now, the card Grenada does not actually have a national ID. And I want to emphasize that. It's not a national ID, but it works beautifully as such. But really, it's not a national ID. It is a card issued for voting purposes. And so the debate has been, I have even heard persons actually sending out information and telling persons in times gone by, don't go and have the ID replaced. But you ask the question, if it is a card that is issued for voting purposes, why then would you not go and get your ID replaced? Why do we even have to prepare a card as such? I am emphasizing here that the replacement of the expired card is an ongoing process. The registration process is continuous. So at any given day that you have met the qualifying requirements, you should go and get registered. It is your right. We have the right to what we call adult suffrage when it was universally made available. We have that right. Previously, persons didn't have it. Now, I just want to read part of the legislation quickly because the debate has been whether the card is mandatory or not. And I always cite an example I understood from one of our Caribbean islands where the card is mandatory. And as I understand it, a husband and wife had a disagreement who they should vote for on an election morning. And the husband, I guess in a fit of anger, took the wife's card and hid it. So she couldn't, and because in that country, the card is an absolute requirement, she was not able to vote. That's mandatory. In Grenada, they don't hold that stringent a position, but the card definitely, according to the legislation, is a requirement. It is produced by the Office of the Supervisor for voting purposes. And I want to just quote quickly here. For the purposes of voting. So I'm going to section 58 and section 58.2. So just bear with me quickly as I just read it. And we don't need to explain it more than that. The legislation speaks for itself. So I'm just reading here. It says, subject to subsection 5, a person who is qualified and registered to vote shall on polling day present his or her voter identification card to the presiding officer. Again, subject to subsection 5. Subsection 5 say a person is qualified to vote once they are eligible, they have gotten registered in a constituency and so forth. So subject to that person is registered and their name is on the list, subsection 5. Now, once they have qualified, on polling day, that person who is on the list, in a nutshell, shall present their voter's registration card to the presiding officer. And I think that is self-explanatory. So with that in mind, we keep on reminding persons out there, please go and have your expired card replaced. And 2, you have never been registered, please go and get registered. Facilities are made available for you for that purpose. And so we urge persons to please take advantage of it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Moraine? 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. But I just want to say that Mr. Phillip mentioned the fact that you shall, and people must understand you shall present your card on the day, right? I am encouraging persons to go out and replace the card so that to avoid any inconveniences or delays on the day of elections, because we will make some amendments to the act relative to that. So I'm encouraging persons, a word to the wise, it's important to go out and get your card replaced so that you will not have to have those difficulties in terms of delays. I'm saying delays on the day to cast your ballot. I want to just conclude by saying, of course, recognizing the effort of all the persons involved in the process, our assistant registration officers, our registration officers for the hard work, and also the central office for the work we are doing in ensuring that we keep this abreast. Now, I want to also appeal to the public, and I hope that this morning's program would help to add the necessary clarity. We have had some persons who have visited our offices and been very inconsiderate, very disrespectful, and what we are seeing here, and Mr. Phillip emphasized it throughout, we are operating within the legislation. So when you go to an assistant registration officer and they say, these are the requirements, they are not doing it on their own accord. This is what they have to do. But sometimes persons go there and of course they've been very disrespectful and they try to create some level of unrest, intimidation, all of that is very unfortunate. So I'm asking the public really for us to be considerate and to understand that these persons are doing what they do for on this side. So Mr. Cadore, thank you very much for having us this morning. And as I said, we feel free to come back once you give us early notice to come back and deal with any specific matter.
Well, I can assure you that I'm extending a notice to you, advance notice right now. You would, but we're going to speak about that offline, off air. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the time and the effort. We want to say thanks to all our listeners and all our viewers. I noticed that there's a number of questions that's been submitted online, and certainly noted the questions so that for the purpose of attending to them, we'll attend to them in our next program. Until then, so long everybody. JC loves you. Continue to do what you have to do, and as you were encouraged, go out, get registered. It's your civic duty, it's your responsibility. Why not take advantage of it? Until then, so long everybody. Have yourself a great day.